Russia is a gas station disguised as a country, and it's a country that's going into the trash can. I wouldn't buy any real estate there, and I don't think any country would want to attack Russia because they'd be left with the overhang of taking over that dying nation.
I gotta say, Piers, I mean, it's like, I'm just kind of disgusted by the tone of this entire discussion. I mean, it's like as if we're debating Sydney Sweeney or something like that, but I got a general and a professional here who are, what are we doing? You're just trying to insult Vladimir Putin, insult Russia. It's like the most childish, immature, just taunting. Oh, shut up. Just the dumbest, like, what are you, 80 IQ, Neville Chamberlain? That's right. Anybody ever arguing against war is always Neville Chamberlain. That is the one and only lesson of history, that appeasement never works and aggression is always right.
Welcome in, everybody. Today, I have an amazing debate for you featuring comic Dave Smith, General Mark Kimmitt, and Bill Browder. There's a couple other people involved, but I edited them out because the main exchange is between Dave Smith and these other two guys. And I gotta say, the points Dave Smith makes in this debate are amazing. And I'm so surprised that the general and this other guy, Bill Browder, actually have a debate, an opposing opinion. Of course, Dave Smith being the libertarian, he's gonna push for peace, and the general, I mean, you would think they would want peace, having seen war with his own eyes, but amazingly, not so much. And then Bill Browder even admittedly says that he's been going up against Vladimir Putin for the majority of his career. So, of course, he's going to essentially push for war. This is all leading up to the summit from Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Alaska coming up tomorrow, or maybe today if you're watching this on Friday. And so this is an excellent debate. Like I said, if you enjoy these type of videos, please help the channel out by hitting the like button, sharing this video, and subscribing. And always leave a comment. Those are the things that you can do that help signal to the algorithm that people enjoy the video and more people should see it. So with that, let's go ahead and get it started.
We have an expert panel to discuss all this. Joining me now is Dave Smith, host of Part of the Problem, Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, the former US Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, Bill Browder, head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Let me bring in Dave Smith here. Dave, again, I've got a lot of military in my family, and they have said to me pretty consistently for a long period of this war that there's no way that Ukraine can actually win, that it may want to win and has shown extraordinary courage in fighting for much longer than many people thought it would be able to, but that actually it cannot actually defeat Russia. And therefore, what you're talking about is just a question of how much territory they'll end up losing and how many people on both sides are going to end up dying. And the numbers are horrific, obviously, in terms of the death count now, over 1 million on the Russian side, hundreds of thousands on the Ukrainian side. You know, again, there's two things to look at here. One is the politics and one is the military. From a military perspective, it just seems to me that Ukraine is in a very difficult position.
Yeah, I mean, part of this, I think, comes down to how exactly you define winning or losing. I mean, I think if we're all being fair, the truth is that Ukraine put up a much better fight than many of us imagined they would have, and I'll say myself included in that. I think it was back in 2014 where Vladimir Putin said, I don't remember if he said 1 week or 2 weeks, but he said, I could be in Kiev in a week or 2 weeks. And that certainly wasn't the case. You know, Ukraine put up a very good fight and they protected Kiev. And there's a part of that, at least, is that the Ukrainians were much more formidable than most of us thought they were. And part of that is also that they had a kind of blank check from the Biden administration and the Western world. Part of that is that since 2014, NATO has been doing joint military training exercises with the Ukrainian military. But I think to your point, Piers, when it comes down to the stuff that like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, when she was Speaker of the House, was on record saying they were going to take back Crimea and that no territory would be lost. Of course, we were told that sanctions alone would win this war, if you remember in the very beginning, Piers. And the fact is that all of that has turned out to be wrong, and that even though this has taken longer than probably Vladimir Putin would have liked, or at least was claiming it would, that yes, Ukraine is not taking back all of this territory. And now the best that we could hope for is that some type of deal is reached here where the killing stops, as Trump said in his greatest comment ever about the situation. And so I think we should all at least take it as a positive sign that Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump are talking. I think it is absolute madness that for the last 3 years, the two countries that have the biggest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the history of the world have not had their heads of state talking. I mean, this is just craziness. At the very least, lines of communication should be open, which they were not at all under the Biden administration. So I'm happy that this thing has pivoted. I don't know if it's true that Vladimir Putin has no interest in ending this. I've seen it reported that he's at least been signaling that he would be willing to settle for the Donbass region and like transportation to Crimea in the south there, but give back some of that territory. Let's all hope that that's true, because the truth is, Piers, as Scott Horton has told you, as your brother-in-law has told you, the only option here is to send in the 82nd Airborne, and the people of America simply are not willing to do that. We're not willing to actually go to direct war with Russia over whether Luhansk is controlled by Moscow or Kiev.
Well, Dave, I think you mean this, but I'll just clarify. The free-thinking individuals in America don't want to send the 82nd Airborne or any American soldiers to fight the war against Russia, right? But there are some crazy leftists out there that put the Ukraine flag in their profile pic and things like that would absolutely support. And of course, everybody in Europe would support that as well, including Piers Morgan. But let's continue.
General Kimmitt, from a military perspective, is there any way to resolve this now without Russia keeping most, if not all, of the territory it's taken?
Well, certainly there is, but I think it would come at a cost and a price that is unacceptable to anyone in the West, whether it's the European countries or it's the United States. More than likely, if we continue this drip, drip, drip of equipment resupply and ammunition resupply, this war could continue for years. In a little bit of self-promotion, I wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal 4 months after the war started, that this was going to turn into a long, ugly slog. Could it end quickly with Russia losing? Yes, but one can only imagine the types of weapons, the quantity of weapons, and the quantity of soldiers that the West would have to put into Ukraine to accomplish that mission. And that's a price that I don't think any country in either Europe or the United States is willing to pay.
In terms of Putin's aspirations, many are very fearful that should he be seen to prevail in Ukraine, should he do a deal with President Trump, which allows him to keep a lot of the territory he's taken, that it will simply embolden him to expand and go after other countries, because he will have sensed that there is a weakness in the West to stop his imperialistic advance.
I think after 4 years of war, that has been somewhat discredited as a theory. The fact remains that he is fighting for as long as he has to take a couple of 100 square miles in Ukraine, fighting a single country. He's got to think twice about trying to take on all of Europe and all of NATO. Now, it's true he could do a lightning strike into the Baltics and probably get some land there. But there's no way that there's any chance that he could take over Poland, Romania, Hungary, and then have to fight 27 different nations to do that. This has been very, very costly for Vladimir Putin. I think he is not only looking for a way out, he won't admit it, but he probably has moderated his war aims a bit. And it could very well be this is leading to a frozen conflict, very much like we've seen in Kashmir and until recently Nagorno-Karabakh.
Okay, Dave Smith, we've talked a lot about this in the last 2 years or so, and 3 years now. I don't doubt for a moment that Putin and a lot of people on the Russian side genuinely did feel an element of NATO pushing its luck, encroaching too far, representing a threat to Russian security. I'm sure they do believe that, but that doesn't give them the justification to, as I see it, illegally invade a sovereign democratic European country. And nor do I believe that that is the only motivation for it. I think that Putin's actions in the last 2 decades make it crystal clear that he very much regrets the breakup of the Soviet Union, and if he got the chance, he'd very much reform it.
Well, I don't think that Putin has really expressed that he would reform the Soviet Union. He certainly has lamented the fall of the Soviet Union and the former greatness of the Russian Empire. But just a few points here, because number one, I do think the most important thing for me to say is that I strongly disagree with our Russian guest here, who described this as a defensive war or a war of necessity. I mean, I think that's just factually not true. This was a war of choice, and it was a war of aggression. And even though it is laughably absurd to call it unprovoked, Vladimir Putin still did make the choice to launch this war, and he is responsible for the enormous amount of human suffering that has come as a result of it. That being said, the defenses here and the responses are laughable. I mean, I was actually chuckling when you said, you're needling him for not calling it a war rather than a special operation. Pierce, the last time the U.S. declared war was World War II. Legally speaking, every single war since then, the legal defense for it is that it's not a war, it's a military action. Vietnam, Iraq, Serbia, Afghanistan, all the ones you could think of were not declared wars. So that's a little bit rich. And look, the fact is that Vladimir Putin made it crystal clear that Ukrainian entry to NATO was his red line. And this point about Finland's in there now, irrelevant. He never said that was his red line. He said Ukraine was. And it is a fact that in the Bucharest summit in 2008, NATO announced Ukraine was coming in. It is a fact that U.S. politicians kept pushing this over and over and over again for years against the warnings of Vladimir Putin and the entire Russian establishment. And it is a fact that the National Endowment for Democracy and the USAID poured close to $100 million into the Maidan Revolution. And if we can't be honest with ourselves and look back at this and go, why on earth were we constantly, look, I'm not Russian, I'm not Ukrainian, I'm American. I care about my country as you guys should care about yours. But we should ask ourselves why on earth we embarked in the policy of needling Putin over and over and over again when he had very realistic demands. Stoltenberg, the former head of NATO, said, he admitted that Vladimir Putin sent him a draft treaty in 2022 before he invaded the country, or late 21, and all he asked was that we put in writing that Ukraine will not be brought into NATO. Who on earth can look back at this and say we shouldn't have at least attempted to pursue a path where we would give him that a security guarantee? And look, it's nice, as the Ukrainian lady here says, it's a nice thought to say that sovereign countries can do whatever they want to, but the bottom line is that is not the way of the world. Mexico cannot join a military alliance with China. That's a fact. And the general here will be the first to admit it. We wouldn't just go, oh, you're a sovereign country, sure, you can be a part of Russia or China's military alliance. We wouldn't allow that in a second. And likewise, it is in the state of actual geopolitics, it was a reasonable demand for Vladimir Putin to say, you cannot bring Ukraine into your military alliance. And we should have put that in writing a long time ago. And I believe there's a very good chance that this war never would have happened.
General Kimmitt, do you agree with Dave Smith there?
Well, I agree with parts of it. It's true that in return for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons after the fall of the wall, that the United States agreed that Ukraine would not be part of NATO. In fact, we said that we wouldn't expand NATO to the east. But all of those agreements, of course, have been violated by the Russians as well. I'd just kind of like to go back to what I thought was the right point, which is the notion that the Russian view that the West is coming to take over Russia is laughable and Kafkaesque. I was in Germany when the wall fell in 1989, and you couldn't drive from west to east because of all the cars coming across from the Warsaw Pact, the workers' paradise, the Soviet Socialist republics. People were voting with their feet, and they weren't voting to go east. I was able to get into the Warsaw Pact, and I've been into Russia. My question would be, who the hell would want to take over Russia? It's a declining nation. The average life expectancy is going down. The standard of living is 1/2 of that of the West. You can say we're going for the oil, but Russia doesn't have enough oil for us to be interested in. It's as ludicrous as the United States desiring to take over Canada. At least Canada is first world country. Russia is a gas station disguised as a country, and it's a country that's going into the trash can. So this predicate that Russia is doing this simply to keep the West out, well, I would remind everybody what NATO was formed for. It was to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and the Germans down. But taking a look at what's happened to Russia since it became the workers' paradise, I'd say I wouldn't buy any real estate there, and I don't think any country would want to attack Russia because they'd be left with the overhang of taking over that dying nation.
You know, Dave Smith, in a way, you could paint a similar picture without the death part about Netanyahu and what's happening in Israel. That one of the reasons many people believe he continues to prosecute this war in Gaza is for self-interest, to avoid corruption charges and trial when it's over, to avoid accountability for October the 7th and so on. But in relation to Putin, do you agree with what Bill Browder said there?
No, not particularly. And yeah, I don't think that's, yeah, it applies to Netanyahu. It applies to Vladimir Putin. George W. Bush famously said that his daddy's big mistake was not keeping the war going for his reelection campaign. And that's why he was a one-term president. And I got to say, Pierce, I mean, it's like, I'm just kind of disgusted by the tone of this entire discussion. I mean, it's like as if we're debating Sidney Sweeney or something like that, but I got a general and a professional here who are, what are we doing? You're just trying to insult Vladimir Putin, insult Russia. It's like the most childish, immature, just taunting. There's an actual war going on right now where hundreds of thousands of people have been dying, and there's a meeting coming up between the two leaders of the United States and Russia. As I said before, 90% of the world's stockpile of nuclear weapons. Let's all take this down a notch. Vladimir Putin has at least signaled recently that he is open to the idea of keeping the Donbass region, Donetsk and Luhansk, of getting a corridor to Crimea, and of leaving some of the other territory. Why are we not all pushing in that direction? And why this constant need to make these insults? You know, like, I don't know, I'm an American. I don't see why I inherently have to have beef with the Russian people. I think my government is corrupt. I think their government is corrupt. But to sit here and be like, you guys are a gas station with nothing. The Russian people have a great culture and a great history. Obviously, the Soviet Union was a menace and we had a real problem with them, but the Soviet Union's been gone for many decades at this point. And I just find that the kind of nature of this just insulting back and forth to be beneath the magnitude of this conversation. It is undeniable that the West did a lot to provoke this conflict. It's just undeniable. Our CIA director through all of Joe Biden's term, Bill Burns, was the one who wrote the Niet means Niet memo, who warned Condoleezza Rice, do not keep pushing in this direction. And we continued pushing regardless. It's resulted in this catastrophe. Like I said before, Pierce, I'm not absolving Vladimir Putin of any responsibility. He launched this war and he's responsible for the destruction. But for God's sake, Pierce, you start this at the beginning asking, like, but what's the actual plan? Like, what's the military plan for how you can evict the Russians? Nobody here has anything. So what do you want to do? Let's try to negotiate an end to this so people stop dying. It is the best case scenario. And it's our only chance to get out of this at this point, is if we can work out some deal. So for God's sake, let's try to push toward that. No, with all of these wars, Pierce, you know, all the wars over the last 25 years of my life, it's always like the propaganda keeps on moving and moving and moving. There's a lot of bluster about who the good guys and who the bad guys are. But when you start the program by asking a simple question like, what is the exit strategy here? What is the plan? No one really has anything. No one has anything other than maybe we could keep sending weapons and money in, and this slow grind of people dying will continue. And Vladimir Putin will then, at the end of that, take the territory he wants. Let's try to negotiate an end to this nightmare that never needed to happen.
Yeah, that's exactly what Neville Chamberlain did.
I'll come to.
Shut up. Just the dumbest, like, what are you, an 80 IQ? Neville Chamberlain. That's right. Anybody ever arguing against war is always Neville Chamberlain. That is the one and only lesson of history, that appeasement never works and aggression is always right. Why don't you take some of the lessons from...
Appeasement doesn't work with a dictator. You obviously don't know Vladimir Putin.
Appeasement, we appease dictators all over the planet right now. I just said something that I actually meant, that I think was more than just surface level, and your response is with the dumbest like slogan. We appease dictators all over the world. We overthrow democratically elected governments and prop up dictators. What are you even talking about?
You're using all these ad hominem attacks, but basically we're in a war.
It's not an ad hominem. What are you talking about?
It's not an ad hominem. 80 IQ, that's a bunch of nonsense. You obviously don't know the issues.
I'm saying your argument, I'm saying the argument is that of a person with an 80 IQ.
You don't know the issues. You obviously are not educated on the issues. The reason why Vladimir Putin is at war is for his own personal survival. He's not going to back off from this war. To then appease him at this moment, to give him Ukraine is just a complete...
You're not giving him anything. It's not yours to give. He took it and you can't get it back. Deal with that reality. Sorry.
Yeah, you could impose crippling sanctions on him. You could give the Ukrainians
more sanctions.
And then you could negotiate from a position of strength. You don't negotiate from a position of weakness, which is what's being...
There's Joe Biden's plan. We could end the war with
you don't have to call it Joe Biden's.
We're years...
You don't have to call it Joe Biden's anything. You don't have to politicize logic.
I'm not politicizing anything.
Yeah,
I'm saying
this
Joe
is Biden. You're saying Joe Biden.
Okay, now let me respond. Yeah. Yes, he was, I'm not sure if you're familiar, he was the former president of the United States, and this was his plan. We ran this experiment. It did not work. It led to hundreds of thousands of people dying, and now we're here.
The experiment that we ran is to give the Ukrainians
I'm sorry. Just, I got
the weapons that they need.
Fair enough. Can I, Pierce, if you don't mind, can I just ask the general a quick question? Because, yeah, 1 second. General, you're more of an expert in this than me. Sanctions can drive Putin out. Are you going to back that up with your name behind it? Sanctions can reclaim all Ukrainian territory?
No, I mean, I've been a firm disbeliever in the notion of sanctions around the world, whether it's in Iran, whether it was with the Taliban, but combined with other elements such as military power, diplomatic power, there's a chance that as a component of a plan, you might get to something where you say nobody's got a proposal here. I think what we're going to see is a frozen conflict. And let's be very clear. You got a frozen conflict in Kashmir. For years, you had a frozen conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh. And now there's been a resolution to that frozen conflict. And hopefully we can see at least a ceasefire that can hold off the killing of both brave Ukrainian soldiers and brave Russian soldiers. I never did insult the Russian people. I insulted the Russian government. The fact is, their government has drugged them into a war that, if polled, probably wouldn't poll that well. But back to your point, sanctions probably won't work if that's the only trick we have in our bag. Military power that demonstrates we're willing to back the Ukrainians for as long as it takes with what they need, as well as other elements of national power, that has a chance, number one, to stop the war, number two, perhaps get it into a ceasefire/frozen conflict, and number three, over time, perhaps negotiate a settlement that works for both sides.
I think that time is now, sir.
Anna,
and I think that's hopefully what they can do.
So I really do appreciate Dave Smith's ability to stick to the facts, because it is true that Russia's red line with NATO was Ukraine. And it is also true that there is no way Mexico or Canada would be allowed by the United States to become an alliance with a country like China. Now, I do personally believe that Donald Trump and the United States should entertain dropping NATO and potentially becoming an alliance with Russia. Not only would they have, like Dave said, 90% of the world's nuclear powers, making it the most powerful alliance in the history of the planet, it would also weaken the BRICS alliance that is currently challenging the US petrodollar and rivaling the strength of NATO as NATO currently exists. Now, I know that might be a hot take, but as the ice melts north of Canada, that shipping lane is going to become a shipping highway. And in my opinion, there's no better man to negotiate this type of alliance than Donald Trump, and there's no better time to negotiate that type of alliance than right now. But anyways, if you watch this long, I certainly do appreciate the support. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, double check that you're subscribed to the channel. Make sure to hit the like button. Share this video with your friends or on social media. Like I said, that really helps the algorithm. And let me know what you thought in the comments. And one more thing, I want to remind everybody that you can catch me live on the Jar Openers podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'd love to see you there. We have a nice growing community, and we have a lot of fun. And to be honest with you, I've been talking about a lot of these topics that the big channels are getting to the next day, especially the Saturday show, because what I talk about on that show, most of the big channels don't even get to cover until Monday. And those shows are really fun. So like I said, make sure to check them out. And I appreciate everybody for being here. I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next video.